Starting in verse 17, so Adonai said to Moshe, I will also do this thing that you have spoken. For you found grace in my sight, and I know you by name. And Moshe said, please show me your glory. And then he said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim the name of Adonai before you. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he said, you cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live. And Adonai said, here is a place by me, and you shall stand on the rock. And so it shall be that while my glory passes by, everyone say glory. When my glory passes by, that I will put you in the cleft of the rock. And I will cover you with my hand while I pass by. And then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. Turn to two people and tell them I'm ready for this. And you can be seated. You can be seated this morning. We talk a lot about the glory within Scripture, within communities. Churches talk about the glory. They say we've experienced the glory. We've seen the glory. We've felt the glory. How many have felt the glory today? Experiencing the glory. What the glory represents is the presence of Adonai, the presence of Yahweh himself. You can experience that glory anywhere as believers in Messiah. Amen? What is the glory? We've talked a lot about the glory. One of our first congregations that we began years ago up in Worcester was Beit HaKavod, was Beth Kavod, the house of glory. I thought, what a more appropriate name for a place to worship than the house of glory. Beit HaKavod. And so Moshe says, show me your glory. We talk about the glory, the goodness. We talk about the 13 attributes of the Almighty seen in the name alone. The name and the glory are connected. But you have two words in Hebrew for glory. Some of you have heard this before, but we're going to go another area with this to understand the secret of the glory. What really is the glory? How many want to experience the glory? Moshe said, show me your glory. Listen, Moshe had seen the water split. He walked between the walls of water. He watched the sea close in on a world superpower and wipe them out. He's seen clouds of fire. They're being led by a cloud. They're being fed by manna and quail and water coming from a rock. He's seen all of the 10 plagues on Egypt. And he says something that we can't even understand. He says, show me your glory. I've seen it all. I've seen you move. I've seen your power. But show me your glory. Glory in Hebrew, there's two words. We talk about two words. Everybody say two. That would be Shekhinah is one, and Kavod is the other. Shekhinah, everyone say Shekhinah. It's where the church gets the word Shekinah. You ever hear somebody say, Shekinah glory? That's the old church way of saying, that's the Shekinah. That's the brightness. That's the brightness. That's the visible manifestation of the brightness of the light. If you've ever experienced the Shekinah of where the light would come in, that is that light that Scripture says no man can even stand that light. It's so bright it just burns everything away. The light that brings darkness to nothing, the Shekinah. But the word that we're talking about today, when we talk about glory, we'll be speaking of kavod. Everyone say kavod. Kavod. What's the glory of Adonai? What's the glory of the Almighty? Everyone wants to see the glory, but nobody really understands what that secret is all about. There's a price to be paid for seeing the glory. I want to say that again. There's a price to be paid for seeing the glory. You can't just say, I just show me your glory. You have to pay a price to see that glory. Moshe paid a price to see the glory. Abraham paid a price. He left it all to see the glory of Adonai by faith. Well, who all saw the glory in the Bible? We talk about Abraham, who left his family and his home and all of his stuff to journey in a place he didn't even know where he was going, but step by step. He wanted to see the glory of the promises of Adonai. Moshe saw the glory. Moshe, I'll put you in a little place in this rock. There's a cleft of the rock. Isn't it interesting about Moses? He's always in a place of in-between places. Isn't that interesting? Think about that. Where do we see Moshe? In between places. He's in between the Hebrews and the Egyptians. He's in between living life like a Hebrew and living life in a palace. Now we find him in between death and life at Pesach. And then we find him in between the walls of water, crossing over between two lands. Moses is always in this place of in-betweens. Now he's in the place of an in-between in the cleft of the rock. Everybody say in-betweens. There's that place. Show me your glory. He says, I'll show you, but you're not going to see my face. You'll experience my backside. We've talked about what that actually could have been. Who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible? Moshe himself. That's called the Torah. The first 5 books in the Bible are called the Torah. Everybody say Torah. As the Torah. And so you have the first 5 books. And we say, well, how did Moses know? How did he know all the way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? How did he experience Adam? Because one of the words for glory has to do with history. We recently went to Gettysburg, and we experienced some historical things in Gettysburg. My daughter and her friend Victoria wore their Hebrew shirts that said in big bold letters, it's the 4th of July. Everybody's got on red, white, and blue. And here's these 2 girls walking down Main Street in Gettysburg with L'chaim. Some guy, we're walking through Gettysburg and through the fields and everything, and they're doing some, what do they call that, reenactments. And people are all in costume, and this one guy comes running up, and he must have seen their purple L'chaim shirts, because he comes up and he says, oh, by the way, 5 o'clock, General so-and-so is going to be here. He's the first Jewish general in the Confederate Army, or whatever it was. So he's going on and on about this. I thought, well, that's interesting. Interesting. Glory. Show me your glory, how we identify with these things. I'm going to put you in a rock, Moshe. You're not going to see my face, but you'll see my history. Gettysburg was full of history, things happening there. Moses, you'll see my history. You'll see what I did all the way. I'm going to take you back all the way to what I did to Adam and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. I'm going to let you experience it in a moment of time. Moment of time. So he begins to experience that, and he writes it all down. The glory. But I believe he saw something else too that we could talk about. I believe he saw Yeshua. I believe he saw Yeshua. Remember the Mount of Transfiguration? Remember who else was at the Mount of Transfiguration? We see Moses, and we see Yeshua, and we see Elijah. But wait a minute, Moses is dead. How many know Moses had died? Well, that tells you a little bit about what I think on soul sleep, right? If he's dead and sleeping, how is he experiencing Messiah? Are y'all with me on this? So he is dead, his body's dead, but here is one moment, I believe this, here's one moment where only the Almighty himself could take a man from one part of history, Moses, a man from another part of history, Elijah, bring them together at the point of Messiah and put them all together and say, the prophets, the Torah is the writing. Moses represents the Torah. Elijah represents the prophets. And the word, the prophetic word, and the written word, they all point to the Messiah. You always see them together. Are you all with me on that? Show me your glory. And he said, I'll show you my glory. He got to see the glory. King Solomon got to see the glory when he built the temple. That glory, the scripture says that the glory came in and it filled the house as they began to worship and praise like we did this morning. The glory filled the house. What was their response? They hit the ground. They couldn't even stand because of the kavod, the heaviness of the Almighty. The heaviness. It pushed them down. Literally, they're like, we can't even stand. Have you ever been in a place where you felt like you couldn't even stand because the glory was so strong? His presence was so strong that they hit their faces. Solomon got to see it. Elijah got to see the glory. Elijah was taken up in a chariot of fire and saw the glory. Interesting. You know Elijah is still seeing that glory? How many know Elijah is still seeing the glory? Elijah's not dead yet. Eliyahu's still alive. He's still experiencing the glory. Eliyahu will come back someday to prepare the way and say the Messiah's coming. Jewish people still wait on Elijah. Elijah saw the glory. The apostles saw the glory in Yeshua. They saw the resurrection glory and the power and the glory. Rav Shaul, Paul, saw the glory. I love it when you think about Paul because here's a man who had studied under Gamaliel and all of the rabbis, and he knew all of the stuff. He knew how to pray. He is a Hebrew of Hebrews. He is a son of Benjamin. He has a rich and godly heritage, and that boy knows his stuff. And here he comes along and he thinks he's doing a good job by persecuting the believers in Yeshua. And he's on his, he's on his horse, and Yeshua appears to him and literally knocks him off his high horse. You ever heard that expression? So let me show you something. You talk about glory And literally what he saw, if I could say it in my way, it messed him up so bad he lost his sight for 3 days. The guy couldn't even see for 3 days. Can you imagine everything that you thought you were doing was right, and all of a sudden in a moment in time you experience the glory and go, oh my. 1 second with the King. Change it all. Show me your glory. All of these people saw the glory, but what really is the glory? You have to understand that when we look at the word glory today, the Hebrew word that we're looking at is kabod. There is a picture language there, pictographic language. Every letter represents something. You've heard me teach on this before, but we're going to go a little bit deeper today. If we'll look at the word for glory, everyone say kabod. Your V is actually you can make it a B or a V sound. Kabod. Notice the first letter is the kaf. Everyone say kaf. When you do this, is a good way to remember. Cough. Take your hand like this. That's just a way to make you remember it. But that is a cough. If you look at, what is the hand doing? It's an open hand. The cough is an open hand. You have just coughed into your hand. Notice that the cough is a representation of the hand or the foot, the sole of the foot or the palm of the hand. And when we talk about glory, you have to understand the picture language is this. Glory is always seen in the hand. Glory is giving. Glory is reaching out. Glory is touching. It's a picture, listen to me, it's a picture of serving. Real glory is a picture of serving. If you really want to see the glory and experience the glory of Adonai, you will be people who serve. Giving in love. How many of you are givers? I'm not just talking finances, although that's a part of it, but I'm talking about giving it all. That's those people who, they're holding stuff. We all have stuff, but we give it away. Why do we give it? Why do we have that open hand? Because we say, He's worthy. In the end, what are we going to do with our crowns? You know what's interesting? Is the cough also represents a crown on its side. I'll say that again. A cough represents a crown of a king or a prince or a princess, one who is bowed down and humble on his or her side. And when we reach out in love, how many of you know that you're princes and princesses in the Messiah? You really are. We are royalty in Him. When we serve, it's humbling ourselves. It's that crown on its side to say, He's worthy of it all. It's not mine, really. Listen, everything we have, every breath that we breathe is not really our own. It's to give away, to bless somebody. The world system is just the opposite. The world system doesn't want to give it. But His people always say, you're worthy. Why do we do it? I love you, but hear me when I say this. As the leader of the congregation, I love you, but you're not all the reason why I do it. I do it for Him. Why do we do it? Why do we do it over and over again? And people hurt you and people wound you. And some days are good and some days are bad. And there's misunderstandings. And He's worthy of it all. And in the end, they take their crowns. And what do we do with our crowns? Worthy of it all. So when you want to see the glory, you experience the open hand, not the closed hand. This is the yod. This is the hand of power. The yod is the hand of power. But He says the glory begins with the open hand. You want to see the glory? What do? Hineni, here am I. You lift your hands and you say, here am I, everything within me. If you are saved today in Messiah Yeshua, it started with a hineni. It's the open hand. And now the hand says, now I'm giving. Now I'm reaching out. Now I'm touching in love. Don't tell me that you love Messiah but don't like His body. Don't say that you love Messiah but don't love His bride. That would be like telling my wife, you have a beautiful face and a beautiful head, but your body, well. What do you think she'd do to me if I said that? By the way, I think she's beautiful all the way around. But if a husband, I'm making a point, if a husband were to say that to his bride, it doesn't make sense, does it? Yeah, ruh-roh. Did you say ruh-roh? We don't say that. We say we love our brides. If you love Messiah, you love His bride. Not just the head. You got to love the body too. You got to reach out. You got to touch people. You got to love people. By the way, that's a picture of the foot too. You got to go where He goes. You got to follow the glory cloud. It's a journey. Amen? Amen. It's a journey. You want to see the glory? It starts with the hand. It's reaching out in love. How about the bait? Look at the bait. Everybody say bait. Bait is a picture of a house. And if we want to see the house, we are children who are reaching out of the household of faith. We are building up the house. See, if you build some... I recently had a conversation with my uncle, who's a pastor down in Florida, and he does work, he builds things up. And he said, I got real excited this week, Rabbi. He calls me Rabbi. We've known each other since we were kids, but he still calls me Rabbi. I get a kick out of that. He'll answer the phone and he'll say, hey, what's up, Rabbi? So Pastor Brian, if you're watching, shalom. But he said, I got real excited when I found out the word meant amen, meant so be it. Yes, and so be it. And I said, Pastor Brian, it means more than that. I said, brother, it means amen, it comes from the word emunah, which means that you are building on a foundation. That when you agree in prayer, you're saying he is the faithful foundation to what I'm praying for. Everybody say amen. So it's more than just saying, yes, I agree. It's saying, yes, I agree with the foundation of his word and who he is. And our prayers are to build up the household of faith. Every time you reach out for somebody, every time you bless somebody, it's not just about them, it's building up the household of faith. We are lively stones, Kepha says, living stones, and the household is being built up. Every time we do something that is in order and good for the kingdom, it's almost like putting another thing in the house. Don't you love that? Don't you? How many of you like to decorate your houses? So think of a mitzvot like this. Everybody say mitzvot. If you're a believer in Yeshua, and every time you do a good deed for somebody or for the kingdom, it's like decorating his house. It's putting a decoration on his house. Well, how do you think he feels about that? How many know he likes that? Just like we like to decorate our house. When we do a good deed for somebody, reaching out in love with our hands, we're building up the household of faith. We're taking the word to other people. It starts by taking the word of Adonai to other people. But remember, the hand and the foot. Open hand, the palm of the foot. You have to take the word out and build up the house. How will they know if we don't take it to them? Jew and Gentile. Amen? He's faithful. Now let's talk about this. Is the third letter. If you'll look in the letter Kavod, the third letter is called a Vav. You see the Vav? It's kind of blended in there from where I'm standing, but the Vav looks like a little point. It almost looks like it has a head and it goes down like this. Do you all see the Vav? Wave at me if you see it. Okay, most of you do. And the Vav is a picture of the nail. The Vav is a picture of the nail. Everybody say nail. Here's what I want you to see with this morning. If we really want to see the glory, you have to understand, what does a nail do? A nail joins things together. It holds things together, but a nail pierces. Say this with me, the nail pierces. You want to see the glory, be ready to be pierced. You have to be ready to understand the concepts of what the nail is all about. Some would say the Vav is a hook. It is a hook, but it's a nail. A hook or a nail. It has something, it's sharp. It's a sharp instrument. Pierced. If we want to understand the whole concept of glory, it's not just about feeling good and feeling goosebumps. During our worship today, just the presence of Messiah was so strong. Even when we practiced this morning, if you came in early, we were practicing, and it just broke out into worship. We just lifted our hands and we just began to worship and sing, and it was just as if you could feel the very presence of Adonai in the house. Anybody else felt that today? And the hair on your head just kind of stands up, and you get what I love what Linda calls it. She says you get what chicken bumps. Linda will call it chicken bumps. Some say goosebumps. But it's not all about that. The glory, and that's good, don't get me wrong, but the real glory is more than just about what we feel. And I love the feeling, but the real glory goes deeper than that. The real glory is connected to piercings. If you want to see the real glory, be ready to be pierced through. Think about the rock that Moses was hidden in. It was cut. That rock was cut. There were two sides to it. It was hollowed out. It was pierced. It was a pierced rock that he hid himself in, and he saw the glory. You'll never, ever, ever experience the glory until you understand the sufferings of what Messiah did for us. Paul, or Rav Shaul, said it this way. He said, I want to know him in the power of his resurrection. There's the glory. But he also said, and in his... Oh, that's not a popular message, Rabbi. We don't like to hear that. I don't like to hear that, but that's what the Word says. How could one man stand up and say, I want to see the glory, but I also want to know him in his sufferings? I want to be able to experience everything that he went through. That was a hard place for him to be, hanging on a tree, face beaten to a pulp. Isaiah 53 says he was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. The chastisement, the punishment for our shalom was placed upon him. By his wounds we are healed. The piercings, the woundings, that's where you really experience the glory. I don't understand all that concept, but I do know this, that whenever there is a glory mentioned, there's always a piercing beforehand. There's always a broken heart. There's always a wounding. There's always a hurting. You can't experience the real glory until you really have a broken heart. I'll give you a concept. Spirit says to remind you of this. Think about Jacob. Jacob was a whole man. Jacob was an ish, a whole man. He was a righteous man. Jacob had the promises of Abraham and Isaac, his father and grandfather. Jacob had everything behind him and the power of the Almighty behind him. But before he became Israel, he had to be broken. And he wrestled with Adonai. Scripture says an angel, a malach, I believe that was Yeshua himself, that Jacob began to wrestle with. And notice this, he takes him, and right before he takes him, before the sun is coming up, and he says, tell me your name. And he says, my name is Pele, wonderful. What do you want to know my name for? And he takes his leg and he goes, huh? And so here we see the transformation from Jacob the flesh to Yisrael. Though you start as the smallest of nations, the Yod, you end in the Lamed, the largest of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Here he is, but he cannot experience the glory until he learns to walk like this. I always say never trust a man who doesn't have a limp. I'm not talking physically. I'm talking spiritually. Never trust a person who's never been through stuff. When people tell you, and they're telling you all about the glory, and hear me when I say this, I understand there are some good teachers on TV, but there's a lot of shysters on TV too that'll tell you 4 things, you say it and you do it, and they're going to tell you about the glory. But unless they have a real limp, don't trust them. You have to experience that transformation. You want to see the glory? You want to go from Jacob to Israel? You better be ready to pay the price, and it starts with Hineni, here am I, send me. How much do we want to see the glory? Rav Shaul said, show me the glory. Paul, show me. I want to see it, just like Moses, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And you know what he saw it in? He saw it in the sufferings. I often wonder what Paul or Rav Shaul thought about in his free time, other than the Messiah. You know what I think bothered him a lot in his spirit? All the believers that he put in jail. All of the believers that he had persecuted before coming to know the Messiah. I think that played in his head. I think that weighed down on him. And he probably, if I am not mistaken, I wonder if he beat himself up a little bit over that. Interesting. Just a thought. Show me. And so what do we see Paul? Rav Shaul or Paul goes through all these things. He's shipwrecked. He goes into towns and they stone him. And they beat him. One time they thought he was dead. They beat him with rods, those big rods. They'd lift him up and beat the bottoms of his feet. They'd try to break his legs. Fastings and famines and shipwrecks and troubles and trials. This man experienced the piercings for the Messiah. He said, it's all worthy. It's all worthy. And in the end, here would be a man who would step out and they would cut off his head for his faith and stand in Messiah Yeshua. And to the flesh we go, that doesn't seem to make sense. But what he didn't get to see in the flesh, he probably saw in the spirit, that 68 of the Praetorian Guard came forth and said, we believe just like he does. And they lost their heads that day too. Show me your glory. It's all in about the perspective of the sufferings of the believer. We as a people today really don't have to experience all the sufferings. We're not being persecuted really, not yet. How many know some of that is going to change though, I believe? You better be ready, guys. I'm reminded of a story I heard about, we have, there's people in Russia, we know people and stuff. But there was a guy one time we shared in his writings. He said that in communism years ago, they would meet in underground churches. And he said, we had to be careful as to who we would let in strangers, but we had to be careful because the believers were persecuted in that day. I've heard terrible stories of where the communists would come upon people in Romania. Richard Wurmbrand tells this. He's a Messianic Jew. He's spoken and he's written books. If you ever get a chance to read. I've read stories to where these guys would go and they would baptize believers in the river in Romania, and then the communists would come and would take sand and shove it down their throats because they wouldn't renounce their faith. They would beat up men, women, and children, take children from their parents, screaming. These people went through hell on this side. We're not going through that yet. We have pretty much a freedom to come together and worship, and we don't have to worry about things like that yet. But one guy said they had a meeting once, and he said that there was a couple new guys that came in, and he said there was a couple new guys that had come in, and there was I don't know, maybe 20 of them. They were in a house. And he said that there was a guy that came, two men came into the door with their faces covered, the hoods on, and they pulled out some guns. And they said, we are telling you today as believers in the Messiah, if you're a real believer in the Messiah, you stay, and we're going to shoot you. And we're going to take you out, and you can go join your Messiah. 5 people got up and ran out of the room. The other group stood tall and said, we believe in the Messiah, and we're ready to die for the Messiah. The men pulled off their masks, and they said, we're believers too. We just wanted to make sure who was real and who was not. We're not ready for that persecution in our country yet, but I believe it's coming. I don't know when. Well, wait a minute. We got the right guy in the White House. Some say he's very friendly to believers, which is a good thing. Amen. The president seems to be friendly to believers. But understand this. Our hope is not in politics. And how many know politics, it can change that quick? So what are we willing to go through? Rabbi, we don't have to go through all that. But let me ask you on a personal level. What is it if you really want to see the glory? What are you suffering for? It may not be somebody coming into your home saying, we're going to get you for your faith in Messiah. But it may be the enemy attacking you for your faith in the Messiah. Every time that you deny your flesh, how many of you know that is, in a sense, that is a crucifixion? Every time you tell your flesh no, it's a self-crucifixion to say, nope, I'm standing for the Messiah. You want to say that word, you want to do that thing, you want to take that drink you're not supposed to. Whatever it is, hear me? You're crucifying the flesh to experience the glory, and the flesh suffers. Job was a man who understood suffering. I don't care for the book of Job. I like Job, I just don't care for the story. You know why? To me, I don't understand a lot of it. I mean, I know the historical, I know that, but I look at that and I say, here's a man who suffered, that guy suffered, but yet a lot of people stop in the suffering aspect, but they don't realize the glory that came afterward. And we look at that and we go, I don't understand that. I see people who suffer in their faith walk, and there's times that I shake my head and go, I don't know why you're going through that, but I do know that Adonai is good, and he will get you through. Enemy comes along. Have you seen your servant Job? Have you seen your servant Job? Adonai says in the book of Job, yeah, he says, I've seen him. He says, he loves me. Oh, yeah? He says, skin for skin. Let me touch him. Let me touch him. And I believe that Job went through a fiery trial or a process. You know the story. Here comes some guys and they say, hey, Job, all your cows are dead. Another group of guys come, hey, Job, all your sheep are dead. Before he's done, another group of guys says, hey, Job, your children were all having a party and a big tornado came and wiped everybody out. House is gone, kids are gone. Wow. How many know that's suffering? Why did he suffer? He stood the test. He stood the test and he saw the glory that would come. Most of us are not suffering like Job, but some of us go through things. I would tell you this morning. Whatever you're going through today and you're seeing it, it may very well be a suffering for the faith or making a righteous stand for something that's right. But know that the glory is coming. Can I say this? Your suffering is not in vain. Turn to 2 people and say, your suffering is not in vain. It's not in vain. He's not going to let that just go about and say, well, no fruit from that. You want to see the glory out of it? You've got to understand the sufferings of the Messiah, that I may know him in his sufferings. Wow. That's when you, I'll just be honest with you, those are nights when you can't sleep and somebody's on your heart. And you know that so-and-so is sick and they need prayer. Or you know that so-and-so is going through a family trial or a trouble. Or you know that that person is going through something. Those are those nights that are restless nights. Those are those phone calls that you get, that you reach out when your body says you're so tired you can't do this anymore. Do it. Take the extra mile. Do the extra thing. It's knowing him in the sufferings, not just always about goosebumps. What about, let's look at this. We're going to come back to that, but look at the last letter. It's called the Dalet. Everybody say Dalet. Dalet is the door. And how many know Messiah is the door? Hear me when I say this. The only way to see the glory of Adonai is to understand Yeshua is the door. I heard somebody once say Danya said there are many paths to Adonai. There's only one way. I know what she meant by that. But she did say there's only one door. See, there's people who try to get to him on their own path. There's only one door to the Father, and that is Yeshua, the Messiah. Amen? Are you all with me on this? I'm in the right house. So what's the glory? It's understanding the picture of the Messiah and who the Messiah is. Well, look at a couple scriptures. Philippians 2, 5 through 11. Let this mind be in you, which was also in the Messiah, Yeshua. I'll say that again. Let this mind be in you. Everybody say, that's me. Which was also in Messiah, Yeshua, who being in the form of God did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant, coming into the likeness of men, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself, became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross or the tree. Therefore God has also highly exalted him. Now notice the picture. Suffering and glory. He came down, he humbled himself, he took the nails in his hand, and then he rises to glory. Highly exalted, giving him the name which is above every name, that at the name of Yeshua every knee will bow in heaven and those on the earth and those under the earth. Every tongue should confess Yeshua Messiah is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Interesting. Rav Shaul says in Acts 9, the Lord said to him, Rav Shaul is experiencing a blindness after seeing the glory, and his life is being transformed. And there's a gentleman who's called to go pray for Paul. And he says this, the Lord said to him, go, he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before the Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel. For I will show him many things, there's the glory, but that he must suffer for my sake. I'm not saying we all have to suffer like Paul. Please don't leave today and say, Rabbi, that was not a very encouraging message, because now we all got to go out and suffer like Paul. I understand the concept that Yeshua bore our pains for us. We can have joy in this life, and I'm one who says, let's have joy in this life. But there's also going to come times where we suffer for the Messiah. And if anybody tells you you will never suffer for the Messiah, you will never suffer for righteousness' sake, they are lying. Amen? How many of you have ever suffered for taking a stand for Torah? You know what I'm saying. I'm just talking in-house here, and whoever else is watching online. How many of you have ever taken an abuse for gathering together on Shabbat? Yeah? See what I'm saying? People talk about you. Those are just little things. But those are the things. We have experienced things, guys, where people have actually there's times people have turned their backs to me. Not giving us support, not giving us help in our walk. Things like this. That's a part of the suffering too. Standing for righteousness' sake. You will experience things like this. And you're going to have to take a stand. If you want to see the glory, you continue to stand. In the sufferings, you should. Can I say this? We have the Catholic Church has those little crosses with the little guy on them. Isn't it funny how when people, and I'm saying this not to offend anybody, but when we see those things, we get real holy. We go, oh my goodness. Can I share this with you? Yeshua is not on the cross anymore. Amen. My point in saying, he died, yes. He was put into the ground, but three days later, he rose again. And that's the glory aspect. Listen, there's going to come a time and point where you're going to be on your own cross for a while, but that's not the end game. The end game is resurrection glory. So understand these concepts. We suffer for the Messiah in a sense, but we're also experiencing the glory of the Messiah. Rav Shaul was one who was called to suffer more so than we ever, I think, will experience. That was a calling for him. Galatians 6:17, from now on let no one trouble me. I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Yeshua. How could Paul say he bore in his body the marks of Yeshua? He didn't have the nail prints, but no, he had the scars on his back where he had been whipped. He had the scars on his body where they had thrown stones the size of baseballs and almost killed him. He had the scars on his body of being shipwrecked. I imagine he still had the snake bite wound. Remember when he got bit by the snake? And that didn't take him out. That guy had the marks on his body of suffering for the Messiah. Most of us do not have that. But I could say this, most of you have scars in your spirit, man. You know what? I look out and I see our body. I see people that come in, and I can tell you this. I know true worshipers. You know how I know true worshipers? It's not that I know their heart. Only the Father knows your heart. But here's what I do. I know true worshipers because of what they've been through. The spiritual scars. And when they begin to talk and I see what they've been through, and then I watch them and I see their hands raised and their eyes and tears are just rolling, I say, they bear in their spirit, man, the marks of the body of Messiah. They've been wounded, they've been hurt, but you have to stand. You have to keep standing and trust that He's going to raise you up out of that. Don't be like those that say, no, that's where you got to stay for the rest of your life. He's going to bring you to see the glory. Say this with me, show me your glory. Romans 8:16, verse 18. The Spirit Himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. If children, then heirs. Heirs of God, joint heirs with the Messiah. Watch this, if indeed we suffer with Him. But it doesn't stop there. That we what? Also may be glorified together. Look what he said, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that shall be revealed in us. Do you realize this, when it's all said and done, that the new body that you have is going to be so awesome in Him? You read the book of Revelation, and John, there is a messenger that appears to John. And John falls at his feet to worship him. And he says, Yochanan, he says, don't do that. I am a fellow servant. We say, well, wait a minute. He was seeing a glorious being that he fell down because of this guy's glory. And what did he see? He saw a man who was in his glorified body in the future. What are you going to look like? What are we going to look like? Interesting. Luke 24:26. Ought not the Messiah to have suffered these things and then to enter into His glory? Again, we're talking about the suffering first and then the glory. Matthew 16:21 through 27, or 27. From that time Yeshua began to show His disciples that He must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and scribes, and be killed, but watch, be raised on the third day. Verse 27, the Son of Man will come in the glory of His Father with His angels. Then He will reward each according to his works. Sufferings, physical sufferings, but also mental sufferings. Yeshua's in the garden. And here, emotional, spiritual. Can you imagine being in the garden? He's praying, Father. What was the issue there? We all wrestle sometimes with that to say. He said, if you can, would you let this cup pass? But if not, He says, I'm willing. Cup, open hand. The cough is a cup. Kos in Hebrew begins with the cough. Your hand opened is a cup. So He says, Father, into your hands. I say, Hineni, but can you let this cup pass? And we say, when I was a child, I used to think, was Yeshua kind of chickening out there? Did He want out of that contract thing or what? But then I realized something as I got older. The thing that Yeshua wrestled with was disconnect with His Father. He wasn't worried about the pains and the sorrow. He knew He was born for such a time as the tree. He knew what He had to do. But He understood that for a moment in time, He would be separate from the Father's glory because all the sins of the world would be placed upon Him in one moment of time. The sins from Adam to the sins of the last person sinning at the very end of time in the book of Revelation. All men and women and all those sins piled on one man. And in the midst of that, there would be a separation from the Almighty. And he said, Father, if that can pass, but nevertheless, Hineni, the sufferings of the Messiah. What was it like to suffer in that garden and your pores begin to pour out blood? We've not yet tasted sufferings. The sufferings of the Messiah. Anybody getting anything out of this today? Look at 1 Kepha 1, verses 6 and 7. In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved or suffered many various trials, though the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Yeshua Messiah. Now remember, we're talking about sufferings and glory. Searching what or what manner of time the Spirit of Messiah, who was in them, was indicating when he testified beforehand the sufferings of the Messiah and the glories that would follow. Sufferings and glories. 1 Kepha, Peter 4, verse 12 and 13. Beloved, don't think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing has happened to you, but rejoice to the extent that you partake of Messiah's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. Here's what he's saying is this. If you get nothing else out of this, which I believe you have, but hear me when I say this. Kepha is telling us this. The trials that you go through now, that's a part of identification with the Messiah's sufferings. So he's saying, make sense of it. Don't just let that trial go and say, well, life is hard, life is tough, and why always me? Woe is me. There's a reason. Identify that with the suffering of the Messiah. If you just say, well, it's a hard time, we'll get through it, but you don't identify it spiritually, you missed it. Are y'all with me on that? 1 Kepha 5, 1. The elders are among you, I exhort. I am also a fellow elder, a witness of the sufferings of the Messiah, also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. It goes on to say, to him be the glory, dominion forever and ever. My point in saying all these scriptures is this, simply this. If you want to experience the glory, you have to experience the sufferings. You have to. Do we still want to sing, show me your face, Lord? Show me your face. We want to sing that? Because if you see his face, you're going to identify with everything that he identifies with. And then sometimes it's hard. I'll share that with you as a leader. It's hard. As a people of Messiah, sometimes it's hard. But his grace is sufficient. His grace is sufficient for me. Stories upon stories. I could share with you stories where we pray. Sometimes we see answers to prayer, and other times I don't see the answer that I wanted to see. We had a Jewish lady here coming here years ago. If I said her name, some of you would know her. She had a grandson. Her son married a Christian, and they were believers in the Messiah. They attended a church down in Columbus. The grandson became ill. They took him in for testings, and he had cancer. Little guy, little kid. We prayed and we prayed and we believed and we stood for healing. I don't know the whole story of the family, but all I know is in the end, that little boy passed away. That little boy passed away. They took one of our leaders and we went down together, and as I stood and I watched, one of the saddest things, as I stood by that casket and I saw the little boy and they had all his little toys around him and he's laying in the casket. And part of me said, why? We prayed. Why? I don't understand those kind of sufferings, but I always know this. I always know that he's good. Yeshua is good. Adonai is good. How many know that? There are things that people go through their own sufferings, and I don't have all the answers, but I can always tell them, you know what? Know that he's good, and he'll get glory out of this if you trust him. Part of things that we go through. We've gone through things in our own lives, in our own ministry, in our own home. I don't have all the answers to it. And I'm very quick to tell my children, sometimes, guys, I don't know. But listen, he's always good. Trust him. He'll bring you through it. You want to identify? I could have very well stayed home and said, well, that poor kid died, so, well, I'm not going down there. But no, you know what? Let's go down. Let's go down. You know what? Listen. Lord, help me, Yeshua. It's saying, we're with you. We're with you. And holding somebody in the midst of their stuff. Reaching them, touching them. Remember the open hand? Everybody take your hands, do this. It's identification even in the midst of their sufferings. I may not be suffering, but I have to identify with what you go through. It doesn't mean that I have all the answers or I have all the stuff, but I can say, I'm listening, I'm praying, I'm with you. It's tough. It's hard. And our flesh doesn't want to do that. I want to, listen, there's times I'd rather stay home and eat chicken wings. That's my flesh. But my spirit says you have to identify. You go and identify with people and love them. And then your heart goes, oh my gosh, why do they have to go through that? I was on the phone up late dealing with folks who there was tragedies and things happening. But I say, you know what? He's worthy of it all. When I see the glory, you got to reach out and identify with his people too. And when he comes back, we're all going to have resurrected bodies. You talk about glory. That's glory. But the glory is identifying first with the hurt and the concept of the nail. You know the Father's name. Everybody knows the Father's name, correct? We say it in Hebrew. Most Hebrews will not say, the Jewish people will not say it outright, but it's Yod He Vav He, bless his name. We bless his name. The name is awesome, but the Yod is a picture of the hand. The He is grace or breath. The Vav is the nail. And then another letter for grace. We have 2 letters for grace, a hand and a nail. What's in the Father's name? A picture of the glory of his Son. Because the Son is always pointing to the Father, and the Father is always pointing to the Son. How do we understand the concept of Echad? We sing it every Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, joined together, not in a weird way, it's just that there's an agreement, one God. But yet, we also have to identify as a body of believers with each other, even in their sufferings. Even in the sufferings. Do what you can. I want this place to be filled with the glory. But it also we have to identify with people who are going to come in and not be like us, not look like you or me. Listen, I'm old school. I still have sometimes trouble dealing with folks that seem a little unusual. Y'all get quiet when I say stuff like that. How many of you ever have trouble dealing with somebody that they're not really like you and it's like way out there? The generation that's coming up, I love them, but there's things I just don't understand, you know. My daughter laughed at me the other day. What was I saying? I was calling them mamies or memes or something. And she said, they're called memes, Dad. I don't know what it is. But she's telling me all these things. The thing is this, we have to identify with people in their hurts and their wounds right where they're at. They don't have to look like you. But you have to identify them, get them to the Messiah. And then they'll identify with people, get them to the Messiah. The glory. I'm going to close with this. Dying to self. I'll give you just a couple more. There's a few more. If you get time, Romans. Do we have Romans up there? Romans 8, 16 through 18. Would you all read it? Just read it together. Would you read it? You don't have it? Romans 16. Can you guys pull it up? All right. Can you read it together? Why did I have you read it together? Because I want you to understand that concept. It's echad. It's one body. It's glory, the sufferings, and then the glory. To him be the glory and the dominion forever and ever. The purchase of the bride, there had to be a price to be paid for the suffering bought the bride. The suffering bought the bride. And when Yeshua is on the tree and he's dying on the tree and he is crying out and he says, "It is finished." And then there's a lot of those that want to go to the Greek and say, telestale. He said it is paid for in full. But look at it in the Hebrew. He said, he is making a statement, not only it is finished, but there's also a connection to that word for finished has to do with the bride. So when he's on the cross, when he's on the tree, he's saying she's paid for. through his sufferings, the Messiah paid for a bride. That was the mohar. That was the bride price. The sufferings of the Messiah was the bride price. And then he rises again, and one day he's coming back to purchase and take his bride home. How many of you are glad for that? We opened with it. We're going to close with it. Revelation 21. Would you stand? Michael, Mark, if you're in, would you please come and just play that Worthy of It All song. Did you get anything out of this today? Praise Yeshua. Revelation 21, we opened with it. I want to close with it. Starting at verse 1. Worthy. Would you do me a favor? Let's join in spirit with Yochanan as he wrote this. Would you just lift your hands? Just lift them. Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no more sea. And then I, Yochanan, John, saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of Elohim, of God, is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. And God himself will be with them and be their God. And God will wipe away, Elohim will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And there shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. And there will be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. And then he who sat on the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, Write, for these words are faithful and true. Emunah, these words are faithful. Father, we thank you today that your words are true. And I thank you for a body of people, Father, we are on this side of heaven, Abba, but you're with us. And I don't know every trial, I don't know every trouble, but Father, you do. And I pray that in the midst, as we identify, Father, with people around us in their sufferings, that we would see it as identifying with you, Lord Yeshua. Help us, Father. We want to see the glory. But I pray that you help us to stand and be strong in the midst of those times of suffering. Give us wisdom. We ask these things in Yeshua, the Messiah's name. I'm going to ask you this morning before we close with a blessing. I'm going to ask you this morning, if you're saying, Rabbi, there's been some sufferings, and you just want a quick prayer, I'm just going to ask you to come forward. You want prayer this morning, we're just going to pray corporately. Won't take long. I don't believe it's going to take long, but who knows. Would you just come, please? I'll give you just a moment to come if you want prayer this morning. Adonai knows.